My name is Allison Felis, and this is I'll Follow You, a podcast featuring light and lively conversations about film, music, and creative culture, coming to you from the People's Republic of Rogers Park on the far northeast side of Chicago. A few years ago, the writer Nitsu Abebe posted this on Twitter. Quote, "A good plan is to change so much, so often, that no one knows what to make of you beyond your most immutable characteristics." End quote. Something about that simple yet bold phrasing is always kind of rattling around in my brain now, and has been for a few years. So, as we find ourselves now at the beginning of not just a new year, but a whole new decade, I wanted to talk a bit about the idea of reinvention. Reinvention to me is a totally separate thing from New Year's resolutions. New Year's resolutions have become really stale to me over the past several years. They've just started to seem totally joyless, totally focused on self-improvement in a way that, at least for me, was starting to feel synonymous with like self-punishment. Not to mention, New Year's resolutions also feel really outwardly focused, really intent on behavioral adjustments, without ever seeming to consider the question of like who I am as a person. So it's always like, so if I were the kind of person who was capable of making this specific set of different choices about my life, wouldn't I be making them already? So there's that. But reinvention is like catnip to me. The idea of making myself into a completely different person, living a completely different life, like, yeah, sign me up for that. So, to dig in a little deeper on what it even means to reinvent oneself, I wanted to chat with someone I consider to be a maestra of reinvention, my good friend Kate Merena. Kate is a writer, a psychic, a community builder, and a communications expert. She began her career as a bank teller and has worked in fields ranging from landscaping to purchasing to manufacturing to commercial printing. Kate holds an undergraduate degree in visual and media arts and a master's degree in writing and publishing, both from Emerson College. Her diverse writing credits include a children's book published by Disney, as well as articles and essays published in a variety of magazines, zines, and newspapers. Kate owned an art gallery and gift boutique in Chicago for 5 years, where she curated a selection of art from more than 100 local artists. Utilizing her shop as an artistic hub, Kate brought in musicians, actors, and poets to perform in the space, and collaborating with other business owners, she launched a series of cross-promotional events that brought together vendors and customers from across the city. Last year, though, Kate sold the business to fulfill a lifelong dream of moving to Southern California. Focusing on her passion for art and community, Kate now works as the membership director of an art museum. She lives in San Diego with her cat, Anyanka, in a tiny house on the edge of a canyon where she is honing her green witch skills, reading tarot cards for fun, and caring for a colony of community cats in her neighborhood. So let's hear more from Kate now as we discuss reinvention. So, hi, Kate. I'm really, really happy to have you here today to talk about ideas of reinvention here for the new year.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and I was thinking just in terms of the fresh wind that we have for like 2020, a new year, and the 20s, a new decade, and just talking about how we can harness that energy to get into a space where reinvention feels possible for ourselves in our lives. And I do think of you as being sort of the maestra of reinvention in a lot of ways, and would love to just hear you talk a little bit about what reinvention means to you and how that's happened in your life thus far.
For sure. And thank you for that. I feel like that's a really big compliment. It has taken me a long time to get to the point where I'm comfortable with reinvention. I grew up in a dairy farming town in central Massachusetts, and I knew at a very young age that that's not where I belonged. And I have been thinking about reinventing my life. I think I probably started around age 7 or 8, the first time the first time I sort of got out and saw what a city was and saw what an art museum was and saw what sort of the hustle and bustle of a bigger town was, I was really attracted to that diversity. So in terms of reinvention throughout my life, I think I started when I was 18, I moved to Boston. And when I was 20, I changed my name. And that to me was sort of the start of living the life I felt like I really wanted to live and be the person I really wanted to be. And I lived in the city of Boston for a long time, about 11 years. And then finished my graduate degree, decided I wanted to start fresh somewhere else. So I moved to Chicago and I got a job working at a Fortune 500 company. I entered a long-term relationship. I was living in this great city. And I really felt like at that point that I was adulting well. You know, everything was good. It was stable. And looking back, of course, I know those were famous last words, so to speak. So about 7 years into my time in Chicago, everything fell apart. The relationship, the job, my cat died. Like it was just sort of like everything imploded all at once. And I was left in this space of what's next? What do I do now? And I was able to harness that energy of feeling like I had nothing left. It was a lot like the Neverending Story, the movie, where the kid is left with the one grain of sand and he has to relearn how to dream. Like I kept coming back to that sort of image in my head, like, okay, I can rebuild a world. As long as I've got myself, I'm good. So I spent 2 years trying whatever sounded interesting to me, whatever felt like it was going to be fun, and ended up buying a business, an art gallery in Chicago, and I owned and ran that for 5 years. And then decided I was done with that. And I sold that and realized my lifelong dream of moving to Southern California. So I'm now in San Diego and in a place where I'm feeling really good about everything. But of course, sort of looking down the line and thinking, all right, my cycle is about 5 to 7 years. So like I've got another 3 or 4 years of this, and then I have to start thinking about what's next.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I love where, that you said that there was that period of about 2 years where you were just like, what's interesting? And I think that that's so key, because I think that like a lot of people, especially like, revolving around like New Year's resolutions, it becomes, I mean, at least in my life, like New Year's resolutions have become so like punishing and
Right.
and this idea of like I need to grind this out to be a different person rather
Yeah.
than approaching it from a lot of like people who strategize about like habit changing and stuff like that, they say like don't think of it as like, oh, I'm going to be this new person, because then once you fail going to the gym that one time, you've failed being that person. But I disagree, because I think that the only way that you can dream yourself into new habits is thinking of yourself as a new person and a new character. And it's like, what decisions does this new character that I'm inhabiting or hoping to inhabit, like, how do they live and what do they do? And so I love that idea of approaching it through play and playfulness rather than this like self-flagellating energy of like, I must do this thing, because a lot of times the must is like this energy that's not even yours anyway. It's like this socially sanctioned, like I must lose weight or I must make more money, stuff that's actually not nourishing to yourself as a being at all.
Absolutely. Exactly that. I think in that particular point of my life, when I felt so devastated by everything that had happened, it was the only option for me. I couldn't punish myself any further. I was already in such a low state, a low point, that I needed fun. I needed play. It was the only thing that was going to save my life. And I mean that in a very literal way. So it was, okay, it's going to be fun to go work on that project with those people. And, oh, that might be fun to try out that thing over there. And it opened me up to so many different options, and honestly, it was a way to sort of try on different energies and be like, okay, yes, this new person I'm becoming, what is she like? What does she like? What kind of energy does she want to be in? What is she good at? What is she good at that she enjoys? Because that's another trap I got stuck in, was doing things that I was good at but I didn't enjoy, but that would pay me money. So that old capitalist golden handcuffs thing. And stepping out of that and taking that out of the equation entirely and just saying, okay, I'll figure all that out. what is the thing, like, what is the thing that's really going to be validating to me?
Mm.
Um, and follow the yellow brick road, follow that path.
So how is that for sort of like the people around you? Like, because I think that, yeah, that idea of sort of like not, when there's a thing that you're good at, and yeah, I could just keep doing this endlessly because I'm good at it and I get validated for it externally because people are used to me doing this. When that stops being a thing that you do, I mean, that can have like really serious fallout, like in people who get used to you being a certain way to them, So was there anything like that arose for you?
Definitely. There was a lot of that. There's a lot of judgment, people who were worried, they were like, you're going to run out of money. Like, what are you doing? You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to go too far. You're going to burn out. So there were a lot of people who were sort of trying to gently intervene and push me back onto this socially sanctioned path. And they all meant well. None of it was done in any kind of with any maliciousness. But I definitely had to look at that fear and say, okay, that fear is not mine. That fear is somebody else's, and sort of push past it in each case. I would give myself, okay, you've got another 6 months. Okay, you've got another 3 months. Okay, you've got another 2 months, like whatever that sort of self-imposed, check-in point was. I stopped thinking of it as a deadline and started thinking of it as a check-in. Like, okay, we've played around with this enough. Like, what's happening? Do we like this? Do we not like this? Do we quit? Do we stay? Do we continue down this path? Do we try something new? And just pushing that fear to the outer edges of my consciousness, knowing that it wasn't mine, knowing that it wasn't actually helpful because it was just trying to pull me back into something that wasn't working. I was able to sort of really exist in this space that allowed me to really look at myself and what was working for me and be very clear and honest about that, and then make decisions based on that, what I found in that.
And so when you sort of like were existing in those like check-in spaces of like, in 2 months, like how much of that was you sort of grabbing something that you wanted to do and hadn't allowed yourself to do yet, because like I find that's like how change like happens for me, is that like, especially like earlier in my life, it would be circumstances where like I was wanting to do something and that I would be thinking about and thinking about and thinking about, and then it wasn't. Then I finally had to say like, nope, I guess that this is just what I'm doing. And then that's when everything started to change, when I like finally gave myself permission to actualize it. So how much of that, like, is that at all sort of similar to like how things worked out for you? Or is there like another internal mechanism that sort of like got you to the places that you were trying to go?
I think for me, a lot of it was, I'm in Aries. We've talked about this, and I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And so it would be, how much further can I push it? How much longer can I go? How much, like, how can I top what I did the last time? So it was definitely like an internal competition that was happening, about how far I could push things and how much I could do. And it was definitely grabbing at things that I had not done before that I thought would be interesting. And I went through one entire year where I said yes to everything.
Nice.
And that was, I mean, hilarious. And a lot of it was a failure, and a lot of it was a mess, and a lot of it was really, really fun. So there's definitely, I put myself in this space of, okay, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be an interesting ride, if nothing else. Put on your seatbelt and let's do this.
Nice. And also, I guess that's another question too, sort of like this idea of saying yes to things that people would bring to you. How much of it, so there were the boundaries where people would expect you to say the same, but then were there key people who either by direct influence or just sort of like people you knew sort of like secondhand were inspiring you in a way? Because it was like, that was often, I've learned to sort of in my own transformations rely on like sort of jealousy as like a motivator. Like when I find that like unexpectedly, like, oh, like she's allowed to do that, like that, like I've noticed, like I've gotten to the point where I know to identify that feeling as like oh, that might be something that I want to pursue, and that'll like lead me down that path. Like were there occasions like that happened for you?
Definitely. And in terms of the jealousy thing, absolutely. There would be like people I would see and I'd be like, oh, they have all this time to have this hobby on the side. Why don't I have that? Like, must be nice. And then I'd be like, wait a minute. I have all the time in the world. I can go do that kind of thing too. So definitely jealousy as a motivator. I think that, like, again, that's a little bit of competition too. I dig that feeling. I dig being in that place where I can recognize that, like, what I'm feeling is not actually any kind of like a bad feeling toward the person who has the thing that I want, but like shifting that back on myself and being like, okay, you want that so bad, go for it.
Right.
Go do it.
Yeah, because like I said, for me, it was always like, I have my like little girl aspect that's always so just like waiting for permission. And it was really,
Right.
in my 20s when I finally realized, like, I guess I'm the one that gives myself permission, that like it's really, I'm not going to get bonked on the head and no one's going to draw me out in these specific ways that I want to be drawn out, and so like I have to go make it happen. And like I forget what like aspect in my astrological chart is. It's like I think it's like my midheaven square my moon or something, where I'm kind of like, and then I change, and then I have tension, and then like something explodes, and then a new thing happens, and like, so it's not super comfortable, but that seems to be the way that like I've been able to like get the like, sort of like the gas pedal down enough to like launch me into a new space.
Yeah, change is not comfortable. I mean, I think that's another thing that in the sort of New Year's stereotypical like New Year, new me thing that never gets addressed is that change is uncomfortable. It doesn't necessarily have to be hard, but it's an uncomfortable space to be in as you're growing and you're like, who am I? Who was I? Like where does the old end and the new begin? And how do I sort of gracefully exit one thing and gracefully enter another? And I think most times you can't. It's not graceful. Like it ends up being a bit of like birth is messy, death is messy. Any kind of change has an aspect of mess to it.
And especially when it's something that like you want intensely,
Yeah.
that you desire, because again, the vibe around New Year's resolutions is, I don't know, like, again, and this is probably just like my baggage that I'm bringing to it, where it's kind of like, oh, this might be a nice thing that I could add into my life. That would be a nice little sprinkling of salt to flavor it differently, whereas like
Right.
when it's something that you like deeply in your heart, you're like, I need this. And then there's a humiliation to that, right? Like there's like an embarrassment to like admitting, first admitting to yourself that, whatever it may be is a thing that you want. And
Right.
then the fact that, oh God, in order to have it, I have to make it real and to like demonstrate to the world that this is a thing that I value enough to like have it, that's like, can be really embarrassing, and very vulnerable.
Yeah, that's interesting. That concept of being embarrassed about admitting what you want. I mean, I think as women, we're programmed to not want anything, right? We're
Right,
supposed to
right.
take what we're given and whatnot. So I think that's a piece of that feeling of humiliation. But I'm wondering what else is behind that, because I feel like that's a pretty common, when I speak to people about, talking about what they want, like they get a little like squidgy about it. And even like me right now, like what's next for me, I'm a little squidgy about it. I don't know. I can't tell you. And that's kind of it's a weird space to be in.
Yeah. And I think just sort of, I mean, I think that just comes back to this idea though of it needing to be pleasurable, because it's like in order to withstand that level of discomfort with like who you're becoming as a new person, like there needs to be pleasure in it somewhere, whether it's like the ultimate
Right.
goal of whatever the X marks the spot is, or just sort of like the daily reinvention of it. Like how do you, where is the pleasure on a daily basis so that you have enough sort of like fuel in your tank to get you through that long haul of like the stuff that really doesn't feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, do you have like things that's been for you? I mean, not that you need to like tell on yourself or anything, but like what are the ways that like you can, what are the way, like, are there ways that you found that you can like bring that pleasure to sustain that long haul towards your change, like into your sort of 2 month, 3 month check-ins or whatever?
Definitely. It's funny. This is like, you've got me going down this path where I'm thinking of a million things. And I think the first one, the most immediate one that comes to mind is moving to San Diego. I've been talking about this for 10 years, and making it real was really challenging. And what I ended up having to do was come here 5 times a year on vacation to sort of be in the energy of it and just know that I was in the place I wanted to be and in the place that made me happy. And that was expensive at a time when I had no money and felt frivolous on some level, but it was the thing that actually got me here, was those baby steps toward making it like real for my body. And in terms of shorter timeframes, like 2 months, 3 months, that kind of thing, I think for me, it's noticing what's happening every day and what the changes are every day. One of my traditions that I do almost every year is I call it a gratitude jar, but it's not even really a gratitude jar. It's a things I've noticed jar, where like every day or two, I just write down something on a piece of paper that was sort of notable. It might be an interaction I had with somebody. It might be something I saw, even a beautiful sunset, if there was something particularly notable about it. And sort of marking those marks of time passing and of things happening while time is passing. It's a reminder to really be a little more in the moment, and to acknowledge that change is slow and that things happen slowly. And so where I might notice something happening today within me, or a feeling that I'm happening 4 months from now, when I crack the jar open at the end of the year and I'm reading everything, sometimes it's those baby steps, those little tiny emotional changes that I notice. Oh my gosh, that was in April that I felt that thing. And like, now I'm in such a different place, and marking that growth sort of like in tiny, tiny increments cumulatively has such an impact on noting, and really honoring that passage of time as change is happening.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, because like for me, like one of the big barriers to change for me, internally is always like, it's never going to happen. It's going to take forever. And it's like, especially as I get older now, I'm like, time passes so fast, And so even if I think like, oh my God, 6 months from now, that seems forever, that's like tomorrow, like my day job is in the book industry. And so it's like, I'm always working like a year and a half in the future. And so it's like when the calendar finally ticked over into 2020, I was like, I have been in 2020 for like a year already, like, and so just like remembering like that it applies to me on a personal level too, that like, just get it started now, Allison, it's like, I'm an Aquarius, and which is a fixed sign. And so I'm really good at like, once I start doing something, maintaining it. Like if I can get into like a productive rut, like that's the best possible thing for me. When I just like get obsessive about like whatever thing I'm working on, I can just plow ahead and just keep plowing ahead. And so that's the little dangling reminder that I've found for myself, that like I've needed to like remember that like once you just get started, you're gonna be fine.
Yeah. And that makes me think of that idea of slow and steady, right? Like change isn't necessarily someone dropping a bomb on you. It can be this like slow shift into something new. And time is really funny that way, right? Because I agree, like time passes so quickly, and 6 months is a blip, really. But when you sort of bring it down to the like incremental moments, 1 hour at a time, it does feel like forever. So I think that sort of playing with time a little bit too, when you're thinking about making changes, like you don't have to do it all today.
Right.
Just take the first step. Like just start, begin anywhere.
And that was
know where you're headed.
And watching you having, you were still in Chicago, and like watching you take those trips to San Diego, like as you would do that, like I loved that and admired that so much that you were, again, like, that you were able to sort of like withstand, sort of like I was saying, not that you would have necessarily felt embarrassed about it, but that like you were like, no, San Diego's where I want to be and I'm not there yet. And so I'm just going to go there as often as I can. And like, I just thought your like commitment to that was like so admirable. And it was so open the way that you talked about that. Like, I really thought that was like such a cool way to like, have what you were wanting in small increments until you could like take the bigger leap. Like, that was really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It was definitely the thing that like kept me sane, knowing that I wanted to make this change and knowing that the timing wasn't right. And then I did have to wait for the time to sort of arrive to make it happen. Yeah. And it was funny because I think a lot of people didn't really think I was serious until it really happened. Even though I was out here like all the time, people were like, oh, it's really happening. And it took probably 8 months before people realized that it had happened also.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's crazy.
I had people still being like, hey, are you around? Do you want to come to this thing? And I'd be like, I moved 6 months ago. But there was a funny blurry line between, like, it was very clear for me, obviously, but to the people around me, there was a very blurry line of where I was existing and what was real.
Oh, that's funny. Well, and that's like a good reminder too, sometimes that like, yeah, there are the people who are affected by the changes that we make in our lives, but also like a lot of times there's not. People aren't really aware. Right. Which is very freeing to remember. I mean, there are the people who go ballistic about stuff that is different, but also sometimes it's like, oh, that happened 6 months ago. Like, where was I?
Right. Right. So don't be afraid. I think that's the conclusion I draw there.
Yeah. And also, yeah, that shame or embarrassment or sort of tenderness about change is really internal, because a lot of times beyond a first initial like, oh, that's weird, people don't register. It just doesn't register with other people.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think, in the social media age too. I mean, the first time that I made a big move, I moved from Boston to Chicago. It was pre-Facebook. It was difficult to stay in touch with people once I moved. And it's been notable to see, 13 years later, 14 years later, how easy it's been to stay in touch with people making this move because we're all on social media. And so on some level, people are aware of where you are, even if they're not aware of where you are. You know what I mean? It's equally easier to stay in touch and harder for that relationship to be real, because they've kind of got this picture of where you are or who you are.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily keep up with those changes. But yeah, like when I made that first move from Boston to Chicago, I sort of ended up losing a lot of friends because I couldn't keep up with letter writing and phone calls, and it was too many people. And being able to sort of spread that out a little bit, in terms of social media, you make one post and it's seen by 500 people. It's just
right.
a wild shift to me.
And I think I was probably even guilty of saying that to you, like when you were moving, because I was kind of, I was super, super happy that you finally were taking the step and you were making it real for yourself. But then I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'll just see you when I see you, because it was like our so much of our friendship was online anyway, like through Facebook and various sort of like things that we were doing through other sort of like what's the word, like other teleconferencing stuff, and so I was like, oh, this is not super different from like the relationship that we'd sort of gotten into. I mean, even though I miss seeing you like in your little shop in the square.
Of course, yeah, and I miss seeing you guys too, for sure. But yeah, it's such a funny thing to be like, oh, like we're not really, even though we're in physically different places now, we're not really in different places.
Right. Through the magic, so to speak, of the internet. Yeah.
So bizarre.
So far we've been sort of talking about like reinvention as it's like self-motivated, but like, is there anything you want to speak to as far as like reinvention when it's like thrust upon you? Because like I had a thing that, I don't want to like get in super detailed about, that happened like about 8 years ago, where there was like a family issue that sort of came to a head and needed to be addressed. And, it turned out that I was the best person to address it. And so that was like a big change in my life that happened that, even though I assented to it and was like, yes, I will take this on, it was also kind of like, oh, okay, this is not something that I thought was going to be part of my everyday life at that point. And so that's just like a totally different energy. And I was just wondering, if you had any thoughts about times that that's happened for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think when my life imploded in 2011, it began with a major life change that was thrust upon me. My partner of 7 years came home one day and said, "I'm done. I'm leaving." No warning. No, I mean, it absolutely devastated me, and it required me to very quickly shift into, okay, watching the whole future that we had built together just walk out the door. Like, what's next? Like, what? I don't even know who I am anymore. And having to go back to a space of almost like kindergarten, like figuring out how to like rework my life in a different vibration entirely that didn't have anybody else's input or opinion. And frankly, in the end, it turned out that works better for me. And I'm
Yeah.
happier that way.
Yeah.
So, in the end, I can say that was a blessing, but at the time, it certainly didn't feel like one. And, just having to start over from that space with it not being your choice is incredibly difficult because you're unprepared for it. So even as prepared as you might be for any kind of reinvention you're doing that is self-directed, you're never really prepared, but you're much more prepared than when some major event happens, throwing you into a position of, oh shit, I have to deal with this now. Like,
Right.
and not on my own timeline, not when I'm comfortable, not when I'm ready, but now, today. That's emotionally much more challenging, I think, because it's stressful. It's stressful for your body. It's stressful for any kind of daily life that you're trying to do, any kind of goal you're trying to aim for.
Right, because suddenly, like anything that was self-directed, it like you don't have space for anymore, right?
Right,
It's like, oh,
or it might
all
be
the
off the table.
right, like all these goals that I was working on, like, oh, I guess those just have to fall by the wayside for a little
Right.
while, and that's as much of a disruption as anything else that's happening physically, because it's this whole rearrangement of like I was on this path towards being a certain kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
and now I don't get to devote my own energy to that. Like that sucks.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the number one thing to recognize is that it sucks,
Right.
and not like, feeling bad about saying that, and about, it's okay if you're not okay.
And
And that's
how
a
is
fun
that
space to start from.
like how were people around you about that? I mean, were there like friends who were really champions for you and then friends who sort of got weird, or like how was that like in your wider social circle?
It was fascinating because a lot of my friends were also his friends. And so I lost a lot of people in that divorce,
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of people. And um, the ones who I did get in the divorce turned out to be some of my very closest friends, even to this day, which is really wonderful. But yeah, there were definitely people who were champions for me, who were like, okay, that sucks. What do you need? How can I help? And then they were like just cheering me on the whole way after that. Every time I made a big decision or made another big change, like 2 months later, I quit my job, and everybody was like, girl, you go, like you go. Get rid of all the stuff you hate in your life, like make it, like realign everything back to you. Um, and so it was nice to have a community around me of people who, first of all, understood change. Second of all, were champions for change. And third of all, who could come at me every time they saw me, understanding that I was going to be a different person. And I think that's really critical. And that experience taught me, and this is what I strive at every day when I meet someone or see someone, especially if I haven't seen them in a while, is to kind of just say, who are you now? How are you? Like, what's happening? What's new? What's different? Because so much happens in those spaces, and being able to come at somebody and instead of saying, you're this person and I've decided you're this person in my head, just to sort of check in with them and say, who are you? What's happening? Is really validating for everybody and really good for communication and for relationships.
And that's such a gift. I mean, I think that that's a thing that, I mean, everyone is busy and everyone has their own stuff that they're dealing with in their lives. And so it can be hard to remember that, like, everyone else is changing and shifting and growing, at just
Right.
alongside us. But in order to, like, I love that you foreground that, like, even now with people, because I think that really is like an amazing gift to see people and to allow space for people to change, and for that not to invalidate your friendship necessarily. I mean, of course, like, it happens where people's priorities change and people grow apart, and that's fine.
Sure.
But to be able to say, like, who are you now, and to not have that invalidate your connection as friends.
Yes, absolutely. Because anyone else's change and any other reinvention or decisions that they're making don't have anything to do with me.
Right.
What they want for their lives and the choices that they're not doing it at me. They're doing it because they want to. And I fully support that.
So, like, that's a really good, I think, distinction to make, and something that can be challenging. So, like, what helps you be in that space, as far as, like, what helps you maintain that boundary of, like, the changes that you're making are not about me? Like, do you want to talk about some of the things that help you be in that awareness?
Yeah, I think having been through it, of course, is really what shifted my perspective. Being in a space where I changed so radically multiple times in my life, and that there were people in my life who really still expected me to be who I was when I was 16, which annoys me incredibly. Um, Once I had sort of been on the other side of that and said, oh my goodness, like, I really hate that. I don't want to be that. I don't want to treat other people that way. That Again, that said, I'm not perfect. So there are definitely times where I'm like, oh man, this person is doing that thing and I'm really annoyed about it. And I just have to sort of, when I have that feeling, like, I've identified what that feels like in my body, that, like, annoyed feeling. And I have to stop and look at it and be like, why are you annoyed about that? Are you annoyed about that because you think you're going to lose them as a friend? Are you annoyed about that because it's that jealousy thing where it's something you want? Are you annoyed about it because you're worried about the repercussions and how that's going to affect you? Like, what is that thing? And most of the time when it comes down to it, it's simply some sort of socially sanctioned competition that I'm falling into, like some picture that I'm stepping into that's not real. And I can sort of step back and be like, they get to change and they get to grow and they're going to become more fully themselves. That deepens your relationship. And frankly, sometimes it ends relationships, and that's okay too, because sometimes you just grow apart and that's okay. And getting to the point where I'm not trying to control or hold on to that because I see it as a reflection of me, you know what I mean? Stepping out and being like, them changing and us growing apart isn't a failure. In fact, it's actually a success. It means that we're both stepping more fully into ourselves. And if that means we're not aligned anymore, that's simply all that means. There's no judgment inherent in that.
And because I think, and I love that, because yeah, I think that a lot of times with reinvention, there can be this idea of newness, which it is, it's like newness going towards something new. But for me, I found a lot of times in my life, times when I reinvent, it's really, there's also the energy of, like, going back to who I used to be, and not in terms of, like, a retread, but, like, sort of like a part of my life that I'd never allowed myself to fully bring forward, like something that I maybe truly wanted in the past. And so there's this, time is a flat circle and all that, time is not really real, but, like, ways that I've changed. I think that people sometimes, there's that misnomer that, like, oh, I'm changing to become something new. And it's like, no, I'm changing to become something old. I'm changing to become more what I've always wanted to be, and
Yes.
giving space to myself to have that, and giving space for recognizing that for other people, that's probably a factor, even if they're not maybe thinking of it in that way. I think can be helpful to, like, give everyone that space that they need to grow and change.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So I think that, yeah, again, so there's this idea of sort of like big overarching reinvention, like go towards it. And then also like, oh crap, something has been dropped on me and now I have to reinvent. So what's the middle path? You know, I think that there is this idea of sort of like everyday reinvention, you know, that there's, you know, yeah, life gets stagnant and you know, you got your 9 to 5 grind if you're lucky enough to have a 9 to 5 grind and you're not working insane overtime, you know, or hustling on the weekends or whatever. But like this, but daily reinvention, like what does that look like for you now? Like how do you access that?
I mostly now access this by being outside. I mean, I moved to San Diego in part because I love that winter here is, 62 degrees and sunny. And I live on the edge of a canyon, so I can hike down into the canyon and I can, check out all the plants and this landscape that to me is really alien, because I grew up in Massachusetts and I lived in Chicago for a long time and they're very similar. And moving here, like, what are these plants? Like, what are these animals? There are hummingbirds everywhere. And, I have a murder of crows who live in the backyard and a colony of feral cats, and there are coyotes, and, the mice here are different. Like, it's all of these sort of little like nature things. That really excites me. Like, and I get to sort of discover something new every time that I'm outside, and it adds to my, like, the way that I see that is like all of that information sort of adds to my experience as a human being on this planet. Like, getting to experience this is a blessing and a miracle. And a lot of people don't get to have that experience. And so I'm really grateful for that and to be in a space where I can have that. And like the other night, I was sort of feeling really, like I just had a week of like, everything's really, like the energy is really kind of icky and work is really stressful and I'm feeling a little bit burnt out. And I was waiting for my bus at the time that the moon was rising, the full moon the other night. And I just stopped and I watched the full moon rise over the mountains. And that was 10 minutes. And it shifted my perspective entirely. Like, it really brought me back to myself and back to my place on this planet, in this particular space and time, in the universe, which is, sort of this very cosmic view, but it gave me a new perspective and really sort of refreshed where I am right now. Another thing I've been exploring lately is the idea of hobbies. I've never really had a hobby in the way that I think other people have hobbies. I probably have, but like I've never considered it that. So I took up knitting a couple of weeks ago.
Nice.
Like, let's see if I can figure out how this works. And will I stick with it? I don't know. But I was like, let me try something new. And what I thought was most interesting about that is I realized that I'm very bad, and this is so ironic in the context of our conversation, I'm very bad at letting myself be bad at things.
Yeah.
Like
Same. Hardcore same.
It was awful. Like, riddled with mistakes. I couldn't get it. My hands felt awkward. And I was like, I'm going to quit. This is silly. Why am I doing this? And then I was like, I realized what was happening. And I was like, let yourself be bad at this. Like, just go on ahead and like do this for like an hour a day for 5 days and sort of see what happens. And the last pass that I made it was pretty good, if I do say so myself. So I was like, you learned a new skill. Look at that. And it only took 5 hours.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I fall into that trap so often. And it's even in the context of things that I'm quote unquote good at. Like, anytime that my partner Brian and I, who we make music together, anytime he brings me a new song that we have to learn, I lose my mind. I'm like, I get so nervous and like I don't want to do it. And it's just because it's unknown. It's the dark, unknown horizon. And even though I've done it so many times and it's going to be fine and we're going to figure it out and like I can trust my instincts, I still like, I mean, and he has like a really good sense of humor about it and like knows like when I'm starting to get freaked out and it's fine. Like we've like worked it out, like what's actually happening for me emotionally. But it's amazing how like it just can be really scary to just do something new. Yeah. And so, around that, like, I think for me, it's been remembering to be playful. Like I was, I just have found like it always happens in the winter, where that's like why you left Chicago, right? It's like, it's really, dreary and it's hard to sort of feel like lively, and not that we need to feel lively all the time, but yeah, it can be a struggle for me to sort of feel creative and feel enthusiastic when life just feels challenging to be in because of the weather.
Right.
And I've really reminded myself recently that like approaching things through the lens of playfulness is really important, because I don't have access to my good ideas when I'm feeling gripped, when I'm like, gripped
Right.
down into a sense of like duty or like the importance of doing XYZ, that when I am expansive and playful, that's where the magic happens. And even in the smallest interactions with just people at my day job or with my partner or whatever I'm doing, or just even my ability to like respond to a text message, it's like if I'm in a
Yeah.
space of playfulness, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. When you get in that space of like have to or should, oof, that'll just knock you right out.
It's so bad. And yeah. And again, like it happens all the time. Like
All the time.
why must we relearn this constantly?
Exactly.
Constantly, like I should know better, and that should is part of what squashes it, right?
Yeah.
Thinking that you should know better, quote unquote, like that's part of what just makes it difficult to do that.
Right. Right. Life is an unfolding process, and every day is different, and every day is another sort of step in some direction. Um, yeah.
Yeah, because and again, with New Year's resolutions, they always feel so, yeah, broad, and you must attack the thing and you must live your best life, and all of those imperatives that are just like exhausting and not fun. But yeah, just being open to reinventing every day. The that's It can be scary and it can be vulnerable, but
Mhm.
I think that realigning that as something that's thrilling and something that's pleasurable and something that really only needs the slightest bit of just shifting your perspective. I remember I've never ever made it all the way through The Artist's Way, the Julia Cameron. I've sort of done some of them, but I've never actually made it through the whole thing. But
Yeah.
just that idea of the artist dates and how small they can really
Mhm.
be. And I remember just like deciding to go to like Walgreens and just look at like glittery tubes of like lip gloss. And that was like really fun and invigorating. And just
Right.
like taking those little sort of like, what's a fun, amusing thing that can be exciting to me in this moment. Yeah, that can sometimes be enough to help us remember that reinvention doesn't have to be big or overwhelming or scary or labor intensive or time intensive or money intensive.
Absolutely. And I love that example, and I love that you brought up The Artist's Way. I've done it once all the way through, and then yeah, periodically done other bits and pieces of it. And the one thing that has stuck with me really is the artist dates. And whenever I'm feeling in a place where I'm stagnant, I'm like, okay, what do I enjoy? Go do something you enjoy for an hour. And it might be something like, yeah, going to a museum or going to an event, like something sort of a little bit bigger and more commitment, financially commitment involved. But I love the idea of like just walk into Walgreens and look at some glittery lip gloss. Like that's brilliant because it's so simple, it's so easy, it's something you can do on your way anywhere else. And I think sort of shifting the perspective and thinking of things in those tiny increments, but those tiny increments add up, and it really only takes something very small to shift your whole energy field, to shift the whole way that you're sort of existing in the world. And it can be something that simple.
And for me, it's such a good reminder also that it's an inside job. It's like even if you're trying to change something external about your circumstances, it's like it's my job to feel good enough to make these choices that I need to make. And like, what do I need to do to make that happen? And sometimes, yeah, that involves like setting a boundary that like for me might feel uncomfortable, like saying like,
Mhm.
no, I can't come to your thing, or like, no, I need to have an early night tonight, or whatever it might be, or no, I just need time alone. But reinforcing that, yeah, no one's going to do it for me. But
Yeah.
when I allow that to be true and committed to it, that's inevitably when the cavalry arrives, right? Like that's when you make space for then people to show up in ways that you would never have guessed that people are going to come and support you in living more into whatever size of dream you're trying to achieve.
Yes, that's so true. And I think the point about other people is really interesting too, because you sort of never know how people are going to respond. You know, we build these ideas up in our head about what they think, whoever they is. And a lot of times people will surprise you, especially if you're committed to something from the inside out. Like you said, the inside job, making the decision for yourself, and really sort of embodying that from the inside out. The people who show up will be people who want to back you. And I think assuming that no one will support you and that you're alone in this is not necessarily the right choice. I think being more neutral and saying, let's wait and see what happens, rather than saying, oh, they're going to think this, they're going to think that. Just be like, okay, I'm going to do this. Let's see what happens. Think of it as an experiment.
Totally. Well, and if nothing else, like hopefully this chat that we've just been having will be medicinal for people who are listening out there in the world and are thinking of ways that they might want to take a step and reinvent. And so hopefully this has been helpful and a support. So Kate and I support you, everyone. Go do the thing. Be the person. So yeah, as we're looking to wind down here, is there anything else, any final thoughts about reinvention or final thoughts about sort of things that you feel like would be helpful for people to know about what you do and who you are and where you're headed?
I think the last thing that I sort of want to leave listeners with is that finding your voice is really important, and figuring out where your voice ends and other people's voices begin is really important. I think what I was just saying about what they think, sort of separating that out and finding your own voice and your own desires is really important. I'm in the process of doing that right now as I think about what's next for me. I've been in an 18-month period of sort of resting after this last big shift that I made. And I'm starting to think about what's next for me, what that is other than, knitting and hanging out in the canyon. But I think the place that people can find me, if they're interested in finding me, I have a fresh new Instagram account under Lifestyle of the Real and Not Famous.
I love it. Oh my God, that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, it's really fun, and I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with it yet, other than post some pictures of things I find interesting. So that's that, and more to come as I figure out what's next for me.
Well, and I love leaving it on that note, lifestyles of the not rich and not famous, because that's what I want to do here on this podcast is like, what are people actually doing? Because it's like I have podcasts that I love that I love to listen to and that are really nourishing for me when I take the time to listen to them. But there can be this othered sense of like there are other people out there doing things that are cool that I wish, again, back to that jealousy aspect, like something I wish I could be doing, and I wish I could be, spending my time doing XYZ or going whatever place. And I love the idea of bringing it back down into my reality. And I shouldn't even say back down into, but just grounding into my reality of here's all these amazing people that I know doing all these amazing things. And it's fun for me to get to talk to my inspiring friends, and hopefully it'll be fun for people who are listening too to realize that you don't have to be a famous author, you don't have to be a touring musician, you don't have to be an influencer, like to be doing things that are cool and fun and noteworthy, and that will hopefully encourage other people to take a step and live a dream and have a little more lightness on a daily basis in terms of just walking around in the world as a person.
Yeah, I love it.
So, Kate, thank you so much for being here with me today. This has just been incredibly enjoyable for me to talk with you on this subject, because like I said, I really do think of you as the maestra of reinvention.
Thank you. It's absolutely been my pleasure to be here.
So are you inspired to blow up your life and start fresh or what? So maybe not, but that's kind of exactly my point. You don't have to blow up your life in order to have a sense of freshness on a daily basis. Of course, reinvention comes with the territory when we experience major life events like graduation from school, or beginnings or endings of relationships, or when we encounter death. But it's also available to us at any given moment, which I think is so crucial to remember on a daily basis to sort of push back against a very real tendency to get stagnant within ourselves. So find a way to play with it. Walk a different path to the office if you can. Go to that other grocery store. Wear a different perfume. It all counts. It's all a way of practicing figuring out what you really want versus finding yourself floating along with what you're supposed to want. So in the meantime, you can follow along with Kate's adventures on Instagram at Lifestyle of the Real and Not Famous. And I'll link that in the show notes for you to click on. And you can always find me online at queenofpeaches.com. Bye for now.